Thanks, Brian. How's everyone doing today? Quiet, it's still early in the morning. Coffee hasn't kicked in yet. So welcome to the Western AI Fireside Chat. The goal today is to discuss what the future of AI holds and understand what impact it will have on the world. AI conversations are frequent these days, but interdisciplinary ones are rare. The goal with this conversation is to bring together people from all kinds of different backgrounds. The panel today has a breadth of knowledge, including computer science, business, philosophy, psychology, media, biology, and mathematics. The goal is to paint a holistic and accurate picture of what the future of AI holds. We're going to be talking about some fascinating things today, from machine consciousness to how AI affects the job market. So could everyone take a moment now to turn off your phones and put any devices away so you can fully enjoy the conversation. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our panelists to the stage. Round of applause for the panelists. So why don't we begin with you each introducing yourselves.
You hear me? Okay. Hello, everyone. So excited to be here. My name is Yasser. I'm a professor at Ivy Business School. I'm teaching and researching technology and innovation in general. How much time do I have for the introduction? 1 second or 1 minute?
1 minute.
Okay. So I originally am from electrical engineering department in control orientation. And I'm now doing research in technology and innovation. That's it. Yep.
My name is Joanna Redden. I'm an associate prof in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies. I co-direct the Data Justice Lab, which is a UK-based research center. I'm co-directing a new research center here at Western called Starling, Just Communities, Just Technologies, Just Societies. I'm playing with the name, it's brand new. You'll hear more about that soon. I study the social justice implications of automated decision-making systems. I'm a social scientist, and that's it from me. Is somebody?
Good morning. I'm Mike Anderson. I am the director of the Rotman Institute for Philosophy here. Some time ago, I used to build AI systems. Our interest was in building AI systems that could examine themselves and fix themselves. And we had some success with that. Then I became a cognitive neuroscientist and studied, the human brain. And then I came here, I'm a philosopher again. And here I am.
Western's chief AI officer, a professor of computer science, member of Rotman Institute of Philosophy and Brain and Mind Institute. I'm a theoretical computer scientist interested in neural computation. So that's the types of computations that happen both in biological brains and in artificial brains.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Can we get one more round of applause? So in our first segment, I'll be asking individual questions to each of our panelists. And after their response, you're more than welcome to chime in with any thoughts or questions that you had along the way. For the panelists. The questions from the audience will be coming later in the event. So first is for Professor Rahrovani. How do you perceive organizations innovating with AI in the next few years? Could you contrast AI's innovation trajectory with previous technological breakthroughs, highlighting whether AI represents a fundamentally distinct advancement or shares parallels with innovations of the past? You have 4 minutes.
4 minutes, okay. You hear me? Okay. I'll start. I'm the shallow guy. So these are deep thinkers, philosophy, computer science. I'm from business school, so I talk about products and services. So cut me some slack, okay? So thanks for the question. First of all, the way I see AI, I don't see it as a set of technologies. I see it as a kind of a phenomenon, as something that is like the frontier of computational advancement. So it's an evolving thing. There is no stable. We had this conversation in the bathroom, that it's you don't the referent is moving, right? If you ask a 5-year-old kid and the answer comes back, you say smart, but if the same answer comes next year, it's not that smart. In 2 years, probably it's dumb, right? So having that said, that's like an ongoing frontier of what we do next in computing, right? Having that said, from an organizational perspective, I see a couple of challenges similarities and challenges with the past technology. If I want to caption it as, let's say, a traditional name of IT, information technology versus AI, definitely there are commonalities and at the same time new challenges that we see for managers in organizations that are clients or adopters of this technology. Number one, we know that it's the autonomy is there. Yes, always IT had autonomy. But the challenge was that we give the IT delegate as managers some task. It reduces human error, and it was automating and informating us as managers, and we could make decisions, right? Now, the same thing for AI. We have data still, but the challenge is that when we go with AI, the autonomy is way more than that. I don't know. We talk about the agency of it. Probably you can talk about that. I'm not an expert on this, but we can argue that it goes to areas that the manager not necessarily delegated anything to do that. So that becomes one challenge. The other one is the learning. IT learned ERP, enterprise resource planning, helping managers to make decisions and collect data and organize it properly in organizations. But now the challenge is that in the past, learning was based on proprietary information and data of the company that we developed ourselves. It could be Netflix, our core competency that we had. But now it's going and using the data that we don't know from outside. So there are all sorts of IP issues, intellectual property, privacy, trust. You don't trust it. So manager has a challenge of managing that from learning perspective is also a challenge when we compare it to the traditional IT. And the last one is, I don't know how to call it, inescrutable. The AI is more inescrutable compared to IT that we had traditionally as a manager. I don't know exactly. It's opaque, not visible. It's not transparent. Less number of people understand what is inside the black box. So when I step back as a manager, I have way harder time to manage and rely on it, right? So there's a traditional maybe 40, 50 years of research on sociology of innovation, that invention is something, light bulb, but the innovation is something else. The diffusion of innovation in the market is completely some other story. You may have the best invention. The guy who had the light bulb patent was not Edison. Edison's job was bringing it to the market and commercializing and the innovation process and adoption. So if I step back, if I want to say, what are the challenges? I think we're going to keep going and innovate. I can't predict technology. I can't predict what is happening, but I can see some of the challenges that we have in organizations as managers. So one is that we keep innovating in the function, right? And we're good at this, especially computer science and engineering departments. We innovate, we automate this, we automate that. ChatGPT came in, made it more fun. I can now do this that humans used to do. I'm the first one doing it, fun. But if you think about the notion of innovation, I want to introduce another dimension to it. Not only in the function, whether you are incrementally or radically innovating in the function. The other dimension that I want to add is the meaning. What do I mean by that? Probably a couple of examples help. Think about Nintendo. At a time, I think it was PS2 versus Xbox. Nintendo was in the market. The market is a brutal game on the controller and more capacity, more processing. A lot of shooting games, strategy games, flipping, jumping up and down, right? So these were fighting and competing on that. So MEMS technology came in. So Nintendo, the Xbox and PS2, which are on the top of the market, said that it's not going to be useful. Our avid gamers, most of them teenagers, are not going to like that. It's so funky. It's not well working. So they completely screened it out. What Nintendo did, they used that technology, but not for automation. They changed the meaning of the game. How did they do that? You see, if you look at the advertisement of the product, it's in contrast to all advertisement of the game that was showing the screenshot of the computer and the type of thing you can do with a small controller. It became what? It actually flipped. It showed mom and the kid, or dad and the kid, jumping up and down in front of the computer. So eventually they expanded the meaning of the game using that technology to become something for different ages. And the competition is not actually on the function. There are other examples too. Think about probably your generation haven't seen it, but we enjoyed it. The Swatch as the watch that came at the time to the market, and we all love it. When you hear it, you see the faces light up, right? So before digital transformation, what was the meaning of the watch? What you were buying? There were two meanings at that time. You were buying a watch as a jewelry, Rolex, Rado. So it was $10,000, $50,000. It was not a watch. You were buying a jewelry. The other category was Timex, $10 watch. And eventually Japanese came in and companies in Hong Kong that cheap watches that people can buy. So watch as a timekeeper. 4 minutes left. Okay. So it's the meaning of the product was watch as a timekeeping device versus watch as a jewelry. Okay. So many of the youth actually back in time didn't have it. So quartz technology came, AI of the time. So how did these companies use AI? Swiss-made watches completely screened it out. It's not complicated. It's not us. We are expert in micromechanical engineering. Japanese took it for automation, what we nowadays do with AI. Let's automate it. It's cool. We love it. We are geeks. So we automate this and that and we enjoy it, right? So they reduce the cost of production. They can offer something that looks like jewelry, $300, but underneath it's not micromechanical engineering and tons of experience that was in Swiss-made watches. But it became what? It became like jewelry, I think $300. So some people could buy it. Swatch got it. They didn't get into the game of functionality, the best. They changed the meaning of the watch. They made it a fashion accessory. They made the price fix. We compared the watches back in time based on the price tag. When they were more expensive, it means that there were more jewelry in it, right? All swatches were 50 Swiss franc, 60 Deutsche Mark, or 40 USD, regardless of the design. Rather than 2 designs a year, they had 70 selections each time and 2 times coming, no repeat. So they forced client to think about it different, and they opened up a completely new category with that technology. Well, they were not competing in bells and whistles on the product, the functions that we enjoy. They didn't have all the stuff that Casio had, right? So I'll step back. I think there's a lot of opportunities nowadays with EV cars and so forth on the game of, I'm not only innovating in the function, but I'm changing the meaning of this. And what is that meaning? If you start thinking about it, not many companies are good at this. Alessi is an example you can search in Italy. They are good in design. But I think that could be something that is interesting for future. I'll stop here. I hope that I didn't go over that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any thoughts from the rest of the panelists? Well, I'll proceed to the next question for Professor Redden. In the context of the increasing datafication and AI integration in our society, what are the key social consequences that we should be aware of? Could you shed light on the current issues emerging from this trend and what challenges you foresee arising in the near future?
Thanks for the invitation to be here. I'm going to start with this huge question by telling you a little bit about where I'm coming from when I answer this question. So first, I'm coming from the position that a discourse of risk is enabling. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that often when people talk about, when I first started big data or AI or automation, the key phrase, and you hear it over and over and over again, with big data, with AI, with automation comes great opportunity and also great risk. Well, I argue that a discourse of risk is actually really problematic and in fact enabling, because it suggests that harm is going to happen, may happen at some time in the future. Where I begin and where my research begins is from recognition that harm is already occurring, harm is already widespread, and we should be paying attention to how harm is already occurring if we want to prevent those kinds of harms of happening in the future. So on the basis of this and where I'm speaking from today, one project that I'm speaking from involves a data harm record. It's available online. You can look it up. And that work has involved researching where and how people are already being negatively affected by automated systems, and then researching through interviews, document analysis, looking at legal briefs, looking at reviews, what can we learn when people try to redress, challenge, or prevent those harms going forward? The second place I'm coming from is a whole series and body of research that involves looking at and mapping where and how government agencies are already making use of automated decision-making systems, because of course there's a total lack of transparency and accountability around corporate and government uses of automated decision-making systems, AI, machine learning, et cetera. And so the project that I've been involved in, kind of a multinational project, has involved looking at where and how these systems are in use and trying to study the impact of these systems on decision-making practices. The third project has involved looking at and trying to understand from government agencies that are making decisions to cancel their use of automated decision-making systems. Okay, all of those projects are available online. You can look them up there. There's a research report attached to each of them. Okay, so the social impacts of AI. Well, the social impacts of these systems, they're enormous. The data harm record, for example, documents examples of exploitation. This is where people's data is collected and used in ways to target them for perceived vulnerabilities. So we see examples of data brokers, for example, selling lists of people based on, addictions, health issues, etc. There are examples of harms associated with workplace surveillance, surveillance more generally. But if we think about workplace surveillance, we can see the increasing introduction of sensor systems. These systems are being introduced in different ways to monitor people's working behavior. We're seeing injury as they become more conscious of these systems and the impact they have on them. We're seeing people injure themselves in different places around the world because of this sense of constantly being surveilled and the need to do more than their bodies are capable of. We're seeing the implementation of facial recognition technologies that we know are wrong a lot of the time. We know that they're disproportionately wrong for women and people of color. We're seeing people being falsely arrested on the basis of facial recognition technology systems being put in use in areas of policing and justice. We're seeing the introduction of automated decision-making systems that are being put to use to make decisions about people's access to necessities of life, like things like income, other kinds of benefits. And we're seeing these systems falsely flag people as being fraudulent. We're seeing these systems being introduced in ways that have complete lack of accountability. So the kind of work that I've been doing has involved documenting where and how these systems are in use. And what we found is that these systems are being introduced in areas where there is already a lot of historical injustice and inequality. When these systems are introduced to influence government decision-making about if, where, or how somebody gets access to something that they need to live, there is a complete lack of recognition, which you all know, you all in this room know, and are going to know more and more about this as you go. These systems are wrong a lot of the time. The people developing these systems know that. Despite that, they don't put in place proper checks and balances to ensure that when somebody is falsely flagged of something, they have a means to correct that, right? So the other harm that is connected with all of this, of course, is the huge amount of human and financial resources that are required to fix a system that leads to harm once it is already in place. And so we're seeing class action lawsuits as a result of the harms that are occurring. We're seeing mass mobilization of civil society organizations to try to deal with misinformation and disinformation, right? We're seeing the sheer amount of work that is required to get companies like Meta to become more accountable for the content that they enable people to produce and share. I mean, I could keep going. And that's the sad part. I think there might be a question that comes up later about what to do. Is that right?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what do you suggest? There's a lot of computer scientists in the audience. From the computer science point, or also just from the policy side, what do you suggest we do to mitigate these risks?
And this is the positive message. There is no shortage of ideas about what can be done. And this is why the work that you are doing is so very important. So in the looking that we've done at system development, system use, at canceled systems, we see what's good. What's good is when those developing systems, when those making decisions about if, where, and how they should be used. What's good is when there's an interdisciplinary team including people like yourselves, that is involved in decision making and testing, careful testing and piloting, and taking the time to make sure that any system that is going to be put to use can actually do what they say it's going to do, that there are actually equalities impact assessments, which you'd be surprised, but they're, in my experience, are so rarely done. We're seeing people investigating the extent to which there might be unintended consequences. That involves extensive peer review and inviting external critique. So that's just one example that particularly relates to you. There's also a lot of really important work to be done at the level of regulation. So that's just one example. The fact that we have an Artificial Intelligence and Data Act that's going through the House right now that will not apply to government institutions, and their uses of AI is hugely problematic. We should be outraged about this. And we should all be far more involved in discussions and decision making around these practices, which involves all of us calling for greater civic participation.
Thank you. And if anyone else has anything to add, the floor is all yours. And the next question, Professor Daley. You were a co-author in a study that examined the impact AI is going to have on public health. What were your key takeaways from this research? And based on your research in general, what do you foresee as the impact AI will have in medicine and health in the years to come?
Thanks. So, of course, AI, I think, is going to impact everything about how we deliver healthcare, from public health right down to precision medicine for individuals. But I sort of want to step back and answer that question at a higher level. And the first piece that I think is really going to change is AI as a knowledge engine. So if you're a primary care physician and someone comes in and presents, literally anything could be wrong with them. Everything you studied in medical school, in your residency, all of your experience, all of those possibilities are there. So let's say there's N possible diseases you know about. How do you deal with that complexity? Well, the way we manage it right now is with differential diagnosis. And there's computer scientists in the room, so this is familiar to you. It's a binary search. Now there's only log N possibilities, right? So this is a coping mechanism for me as a human physician. I need to map this patient in front of me to all of the possible things that could be wrong with them. And I need to do that relatively efficiently, especially in Ontario, where the care system's under a lot of pressure. So I use the tools I have. But the problem is that as a human, I have a finite memory. That memory is imperfect. It doesn't last forever. I do not spend every evening scanning up to date for all the latest results, reading every research paper. But a large language model has encoded in its weights something approximating all the medical knowledge up to that point, and you can retrain it and fine-tune it to bring it up to date with the latest literature, and it doesn't have to use differential diagnosis. If you get an uncensored version of GPT-4, ChatGPT will say, no, I won't give you medical advice, but you get an uncensored version of that or another LLM and say, pretend you're a doctor, I have these symptoms, diagnose me and tell me why. It's not doing differential diagnosis behind the scenes. It is able to integrate across all of human medical knowledge in a way that we can't. And so that makes it a really powerful addition to me as a human doctor. It has also been trained through reinforcement learning with human feedback to please me as the user. And so if it doesn't know the answer, like a good second-year undergrad, it'll make something up for part one. And that's also a problem. So you can't just automate this, right? We cannot take a human clinician and replace them with an AI. An LLM will do a good job in a lot of cases, but like all machine learning, it's amazing until it fails, and then the failure modes are brittle. And so you still need a human at the end of that to interpret what's coming out of the machine, but aided and empowered by the machine. The other point of having a human is trust. When I go to see my doctor, I have a personal my doctor's actually a former student of mine, which is really cool. So I have a very deep personal relationship with her, and I really trust her. And I would not have that same kind of trust in an LLM, especially because I know how these things work and what the failure modes are. But what I would trust even more is Rachel aided by AI. And so I see a future where, every doc is actually kind of like a cyborg, maybe not like the movie sense of a cyborg, but they have multiple AI assistants that are offloading the tasks that humans are lousy at and machines are really good at, but still retaining accountability and agency for the overall treatment of the patient. And that scales all the way up to the public health level, where we're talking about policy instead of individuals.
That's fascinating. And I think it's definitely a word of inspiration for people who are looking to go into medicine and we're worried, like, maybe we'll all be replaced by robots. So I think it's definitely that.
No way. You will be aided by robots, and you'll get to do the parts of your job that you like more and spend less time on paperwork.
Exactly.
It sounds okay.
Next question is for Professor Anderson. Many AI systems are already capable of surpassing the benchmark set by Alan Turing's imitation game, yet few, if any, deem these systems conscious. I'm curious about your perspective, given your extensive background in computer science, philosophy of mind, and neuroscience. How should we approach the testing of machine consciousness?
So let me start by saying that the Imitation Game movie was fantastic. The Imitation Game test is terrible. So people who don't know, haven't read this original paper, which is worth reading, but the Imitation Game is a parlor game that Alan Turing suggested. You'd put a person in a room and you'd pass messages underneath the door to figure out if the person in the room was male or female. You ask your questions and they would send answers back out. And based on that interchange, you'd decide if that person was male or female. You can imagine all the sexual politics we might get into based on this particular example. But it was proposed, and I'm not certain Turing wasn't joking here, that this could be the kind of thing you would do with an AI system. You'd pass it messages, and it'd give you messages back. And if you couldn't tell whether it was a person or not, you'd have to conclude it was a person, right? If you couldn't say, right? And it's certainly true that that's where we are with some of these AI systems. We pass them messages, they give us messages back, and they're convincing enough that we could easily believe that there's a real person at the other side of that exchange. That's true when we have reduced human communication to passing messages. But that's a terrible reduction. That's not how humans actually interact with each other, except over social media. And so there's all sorts of things I could talk about that have become problematic as a result of our reliance on social media. This is one of them. The reduction of personhood to this exchange of essentially text messages. And I joked earlier when we were waiting to come out here that I was going to try to slap Mark and see if he flinched. I don't know if he did. I wasn't looking at him. Because if he didn't, by the way, he's an AI. But let's assume he did. It's because he might have been hurt. And that's a cue that we have when we interact with one another, right? There's a massive bandwidth of information that we glean from one another in our interactions. The way we lean in or lean out in a conversation, right? The way we have these micro-expressions that convey our emotional state. And so the notion that the Turing test is a good test for consciousness is just a non-starter. Right? We, in fact, have so much more information about one another, most of it unconscious, right? If you don't even know this, but I'll tell you, and now you'll be aware of it. And in fact, you can really disrupt things. You know, next time you have a conversation with your roommate or whatever, when you're having a nice conversation, your faces align, like you make the same facial expressions, your bodily movements align. Right? You lean in and you lean out, and right? So you synchronize with one another. And that is, again, mostly unconscious. And I'm sorry to have made this conscious for you now. These are all the signs of a sentient being on, as it were, the other side of that conversation. It's not just text sent into the void, right? It's individuals interacting. So if you want to really freak somebody out, when they start having a conversation with you, just don't react at all. Just look at them like this. The conversation will break down immediately because they will have no idea what's happening. And the trouble is, ChatGPT or the person on the other side of that social media feed is exactly that person, where they're just looking at you like this. There's no postural sway. There's no facial synchronization. There's no prosody. That's the other thing that happens. It's kind of interesting. You adopt the same words. You say the things the same way as with one another. There's just all sorts of ways that human beings interact with one another that signal to each other that we are inhabiting the same, as it were, phenomenological world. Now, when, to answer your question, which I don't really want to answer, by the way, when we have embodied AI presences that can interact with us in that way, at that level of sophistication, with those kinds of responsiveness, I don't know whether they'll be conscious or not. But I know we will be compelled to treat them as such. And when we are compelled to treat them as such, then we're going to have to talk about things like rights for those entities, whatever they turn out to be.
Would you say that consciousness is almost a non-question? Like it's hard to prove someone else's consciousness. It's only if they can compel you to believe that they're conscious.
So I find this notion that we have to prove consciousness to be kind of problematic from the beginning. That is based on a certain kind of philosophical approach to the problem, where we are trapped inside our heads and we're having to reconstruct our world. And amongst the things we need to figure out whether exists in our environment are conscious things. That's just really a bad way of thinking about how we go about in the world, right? So it's not as if we start with no proof of anything and we build a model, and that model, in some of those things in that model are conscious and some of them aren't. That's just it's just a problematic way of thinking about our knowledge of the world. In fact, what happens is we're embedded in a world that has various kinds of entities and surfaces and objects with which we interact, of which we have knowledge, and we have direct knowledge of those things. We don't need to infer, right? And so the notion that it's hard to infer consciousness is based on the idea that we start from zero and we have to build up a model and decide what attributes are there out in the world. Are there chairs here? Are there people here? I don't know. I've got to figure that out from first principles. That's not how we work. We're embedded in a world. We're embedded in a world, a social world. We're embedded in a world with other individuals, with other animals, with objects and surfaces and things we can interact with. And we perceive all these things directly. And I think we perceive consciousness directly as well, based on the kinds of cues that I was talking about. But nevertheless, we can see when something is conscious. And so, again, if we go back to the I don't know what's in the world thing and ask, well, is that AI system conscious or not? There's a kind of philosophical problem there, but I think it's one we create by the assumptions we've started with. Instead, what I'm suggesting is that once we are, in fact, embedded in a social world that includes agents that have come to be by different means than biological reproduction, they will just naturally be part of our social world because they will occupy it in the right way.
That's really interesting. And a follow-up question for Professor Daley. Based off that specification, what barriers, technical barriers, do you think we have to overcome to reach AGI, and what is the timeline like for that? And do you think large language models are a path to that, or do you think we need a fundamentally different technological breakthrough?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question. So the problem with AGI is the goalposts move. If you took GPT-4 and showed it to a computer scientist when I started my undergrad degree, people would say, "Oh, holy crap! People from the future have invented AGI. Like that's it, you've done it." And you know, the joke in AI is as soon as you have something that works, it's not AI anymore. Like, oh, okay, well, that's just an algorithm, and that's true. And you know, so how you define AGI is critically important, and everyone's got their own definition, and that's fine. So I actually don't find AGI a particularly useful or compelling thing, other than it's great if you're writing a story or you want to get lots of reaction to your tweets. But it's not a super useful scientific tool. It also presumes that whatever intelligence we develop through AI is going to be very much like human, which is part of the problem with the imitation game. Is it's the assumption that this is going to be just like us if it gets smart enough, and probably it's not, and that's actually a really boring outcome anyways. I don't want it to be just like us. I want it to be something different and new and exciting, and maybe it won't be. Maybe it will be just as boring as we are, but we can hope. So I don't see AGI as a useful metric. That being said, when do I think we are going to socially accept, oh yeah, okay, that's AGI? Well, you know, the rumor mill based on what happened in Silicon Valley yesterday is that OpenAI has something that is close enough that it caused a real split between the accelerationists, Greg Brockman and Sam Altman, and the rest of the board, led by Ilya Sutskever. Of that group, Ilya is the only one I know, and I have the very highest respect for him. He is brilliant and cautious, and so, and he's not a politician. So for him to lead a coup suggests to me, okay, you know, something abnormal has happened, and it could just be politics. You know, humans are humans, but probably GPT-5 is going to be pretty interesting and closer to what people would say is AGI. We'll move the goalposts again because that's what we do. But there's just going to be this iterative process of, oh, okay, it can do more, it can do more, it can do more. And at some point, we'll just sort of like lie back and accept this is close enough to AGI that we'll call it AGI.
When you talk about GPT-5, I literally got goosebumps. I feel like the anticipation before these new models come out is huge. Could you give a little bit more context to the audience of what happened yesterday in Silicon Valley?
What happened yesterday? So what happened yesterday was the board of OpenAI met without Sam Altman or Greg Brockman, and Greg was chair of the board, so this is unusual, and decided to fire Sam Altman as CEO. Sam was told 30 minutes before it was made public. He was called to a Google Meet. Can you imagine being the CEO of OpenAI and like, oh, we need to talk to you? And it was his chief scientist. And Ilya said, yeah, the board's decided to fire you. And Greg Brockman found out like 5 minutes before it went public. After Greg had a couple hours to sort of bounce around his head, he decided he posted his email to his team on Twitter. He basically said, you know, I love everything we've done. You're all wonderful people, but based on what happened today, I quit. It's a great resignation letter, like no flowery text, just like, nope, I quit. So, and you know, the narrative, the inside baseball in Silicon Valley is that it's a split between accelerationists and safetyists on the board of OpenAI. What the actual details are, those are still coming out. Ilya was quoted as saying, yes, I can see why you would call this a coup, but I don't like that word. I'm just trying to bring the organization back to its original principles, which was a not-for-profit working towards specifically AGI.
Thank you. And yeah, it's very, very fresh news. When I Googled it this morning, it hadn't even been updated on the Wikipedia page. So it's very fresh and exciting news. For our next segment, the questions are going to be addressed to the entire panel. But before we start, I want to poll the audience. So raise your hand if you think that AI is extremely exciting. Raise your hand if you think AI is extremely scary. You? Okay. We'll see if that changes after this segment. Yeah. So the first question to all of you, and you can answer in any order and are more than welcome to discuss, is what are the use cases of AI that excite you most? And in what way do you think AI has the potential to have the biggest positive impact on the world?
Obviously, we're being quiet because this is a very hard question. So there's different ways of thinking about AI. If we think about AI as a kind of automation tool, as Mark said earlier, that can do the things we don't like doing, that we're not necessarily good at doing, and to help us then do the things that we do well even better, then there's enormous potential here. The trouble is that the people, and this gets to some of the things Joanna was mentioning, the trouble is that the people who build and want to sell AI have very different interests at heart. And so the greatest benefit is if we can actually engineer partnerships between humans and AI systems to increase our capacity to do good in the world. So the medical context is an obvious case, but manufacturing and other things, I mean, there's just an immense sphere of possibility here. The danger is one, replacement, right? And this is happening. Personal anecdote, when I was an engineering intern, I worked on robotic systems. And the fact is they replaced a lot of workers in the manufacturing sphere. And I was amongst the people, I was a software guy, but I was amongst the people who wrote the software to control the robots to make the things that, allowed for the companies to release workers. I'm not particularly proud of that. I'm proud of the work, right? It was cool. But I'm not particularly proud of the economic impact that it had on actual human individuals. And so it's a question of two paths here, right? Are we going to imagine creating AI human partnerships to allow us to do for one another the things that we do best for one another? Or are we going to maximize the profits for corporations by using these things to increase productivity and decrease the necessity for human labor? So there's massive risk here, just in that sphere alone. There's other risks that have been mentioned already in terms of understanding what humans are and our self-image and things like that. But just for the super practical stuff, there are two paths we can take here. And one of them is potentially glorious. And the other is, well, frankly, the other leads to political revolution. Because humans will be put out of so much economic, they will be pushed so far down the economic ladder that they'll have no choice. And we've seen this not with automation, but if you know a bit of history, as economic inequality gets worse and worse, the political climate gets worse and worse. And this inevitably has led to revolution. And so, I know this is very stark, but this is the stark choice that we're facing right now.
Something that I can add is, I think it's interesting to consider, part of my research is on control. So think about these technologies, including AI. Look at platforms. We have opened the door, it creates innovation, but at the same time, we're losing control. It leads to a lot of social challenges that we see in different communities, marginalized communities, or individuals. Think about parents. How difficult is parenting comparing to 4 decades ago? Mechanisms of parenting are disrupted, right? And we don't know how to deal with it. Forget about AI. And now AI can be even more complex if a parent needs to, how to deal with a children that uses AI for daily stuff that the parents are pretty out. So going back to the 3 characteristics that as a fundamental characteristics of AI, learning, autonomy, and inscrutability, I feel that it's as managers, it becomes way, way more difficult to manage it. So in the past, we were more looking at control of AI as something that we control against drifting. Drift is or unintended consequence is a negative thing, has a negative connotation, means that I lost control, right? But when we are going with something like AI, so high speed, don't exactly know what it is, don't know how it makes the decision. We put it in an area, we don't know exactly the outcomes are. I think our mode of managing it, whether for the harmful consequences or the benefits that even we were, sometimes unintended consequences can be positive things, right? One of my colleagues at Ivy, you know Rob, right? Rob researched, I think 2009, he did a research on Nobel Prize winners. And he go through all the stories that they said, though not an interview, you can't interview all of them, many of them are dead, right? But went to their Nobel Prize, saw that, I mean, he and his colleagues defined 4 types of accidents. And regardless of what they are, but he found out more than half of the Nobel Prize winners, when they talk about the stories, have an interview, have a podcast nowadays in the past, there were some sort of accidents associated with it, directly related to the contribution of what I did as a Nobel Prize winner, right? So the unintended consequences can be also positive, can be absolutely detrimental and negative for some communities. So how do I manage? Do I need a paradigm shift in the way I see control? We were mostly controlling against drifting, but maybe eventually we can think about a metaphor. Think about, I don't know whether you know Ken Block, the famous DC Shoes founder and rally driver. He passed away in an accident in January, unfortunately. But when Ken Block goes into a curve with 200 kilometers per hour with a car, he doesn't brake, he controls against drifting. He controls with drifting, right? He goes into the curve, and it's another way of managing it. So if we think about these innovations, they're unleashed in the wild. I don't know even what are the unintended consequences, positive or negative. It can be positive. Accidentally, we may step on something that is interesting. But I feel that we need something that a combination of many of these components. NGOs can be there. Some entities, when they are in part of a company, they don't let it go unleashed to the benefit of one minority group at the cost of others. I think it's less and less matter of productivity, more of, again, another platform. I don't know whether it's good to ask this question, but I have written a case and I'm going to teach it in January. I don't know how it's going to go, but many of us know what is the platform. It's OnlyFans platform, right? Many people know what is OnlyFans. It was initially a platform for creative content creation and consumption. The way that is monetized is a little bit different, but that was generic any type of creativity. What happened? During COVID, it drifted away towards sexually explicit content creation and sharing and consumption, right? If you nowadays ask it in high school, kids, all of them know it. Parents probably have no idea. If I ask in the class, probably nobody raised a hand that I have an account on the platform, but everybody knows that the platform is out there. So there are things that some people see it harmful, some people see it as liberating. I can't sit here and put a value on it in this position, but I think there are a lot of opportunities out there that I have no idea how we can evaluate it. Forget about productivity and losing jobs. There are many of them that you see at 15 years old, not 15, 19 years old, sitting in a Lamborghini. And when you ask them, what is your job? They are content creators, right? So again, I don't put a value on it, but we don't know how to deal with that. Many of these things are going to be opened up with AI. Some harms, some benefits, but the way we control it, I don't think it can be an exact control way that we did with the past IT, double checking everything and prototyping, make sure it's absolutely safe and have it out. It's a Formula One car. It's not a Toyota Yaris that we can manage it that way. But at the same time, it doesn't means that you leave it on its go, because it's going to be very harmful to many of the communities. So it's another way of managing it when you think about this. I'll stop it.
Okay, I'm going to throw out 4 words that I hope are going to help keep my thoughts together. So marketing, context, collectivity, and diversity. Okay, marketing. I mean, I think the potential of AI is completely limited by the monopoly power dynamics that are influencing the way that the kind of not just the marketing strategies that are being used to overhype the extent to which AI can be used for different kinds of applications. It's being used in ways that are not fit for purpose. It doesn't work. And the kinds of things that I look at, if we look at risk assessing people for the likelihood they'll abuse or neglect their children, or determining whether or not someone actually did commit benefit fraud, right? And so I think there's a connection there that also relates to corporate power, and we see this play out in connection with lobbying. We see it play out in the way that our legislation is drafted. We see it play out in the extent to which we have the kinds of discussions we need to be having about regulation and oversight. So we need to deal with that if we want to have better applications of these systems that work for all of us. Number two, I talked about, what was the second one? It was about context. We need contextually informed decision-making, right? Which has to do with the kind of diversity of teams that come together around decision-making about where and how these systems should be used. That's really important. And we also need to be contextually aware by looking more broadly at the political contexts that are informing decision-making about these systems. So in the kind of systems that I'm looking at, these systems are not being used necessarily to make things better. These systems are being used to determine, amongst a very limited pool of resources, who gets access to what, right? So they're being used in context of scarcity and austerity, and that really influences the potential for good or what could be done about them. And so contextually aware thinking and evaluation also affects impact. Collectivity. If you haven't looked at Ruha Benjamin's work, Ruha Benjamin posted a TED Talk in October. It's fantastic and hugely inspiring. And her recent book, Viral Justice, is also really inspiring. And so she is talking about moving from the kind of logics that we use when we think about these systems and when we talk about them. So often she argues that when these systems are talked about, we're presented with two alternatives, right? We're presented with this promise that AI is going to solve everything, or we're presented with this promise that we are leading into an apocalyptic dystopia. And both of those narratives, she argues, are based on the same idea that humans don't act as agents, right? Like where is our agency in this? So she highlights the importance of collective intelligence and collective knowledge. And she points to various examples of very really exciting uses of applications that involve collective decision-making, the pooling of resources and collective knowledge and development processes. So, Dissident in Barcelona is an example that she talks about, which is a kind of politically informed collective decision-making tool to help people decide their collective futures. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about in reference was Wendy Chun's idea, which I think is really inspiring. So Wendy Chun asks, what would happen if we develop systems to increase our exposure to diversity and diverse viewpoints instead of developing systems that lead to greater homogenization and standardization, which has brought us to a certain extent where we are, right? If we think about social media platforms and if we think about where we've landed in terms of the kinds of discussions we're able to have together collectively, we could be engaging very differently with one another, and we could be exposed to different viewpoints, perspectives, and experiences, which would lead to a different world.
I really like that point about minimizing echo chambers and creating a social platform that surfaces diverse thought. I like that. Any thoughts?
I agree with everything that's been said. So the only thing I really have to add is I think it's interesting, the climate of AI regulation. So you mentioned, Aida, the Bill C-27. We're scrambling to regulate this. And also when harms have been done, we started to do like that, how could you do this meme, right? Like, oh, AI, how could you do this to us? So someone uses AI in a way, one of the cases was a company used it in recruiting, and the AI said, well, only candidates who are old white men should be candidates for CEO because all the CEOs in my training set are old white men. And that's true, and that's real bias. And it reflects the reality of the history of our world. But why are we holding the AI culpable and not the human who accepted that? And this bothers me with the AIDA Act, and I've told Minister Champagne this, and he doesn't agree with me entirely. But there's a mass abdication of human accountability and responsibility happening right now, and we're pushing it all off on the technology. If I grabbed a chainsaw and went and started cutting down trees on campus, would anyone buy as a defense, oh, it's the chainsaw's fault, we should regulate chainsaw manufacturers, I never should have had access to a chainsaw? And in fact, there should be like a whole law just about chainsaws and how many cc's the engine of the chainsaw can have, if I'm allowed. And like, it's really interesting. So I mean, qualitatively, this technology feels different than other technologies, and I get that, and that's why we're reacting the way we are. But I worry that we're losing sight of it's a technology, and it's what we choose to do with it. We have agency here. It's not the evil AI made me. It's I chose to do something unethical, or I allowed it to happen, and that's on me, not on a machine.
So, as an American, potentially the only one up here, I want to push back on that a little bit because we have a gun problem. So the chainsaw analogy is very compelling. But if the ground were littered with chainsaws, the affordances of that chainsaw would offer themselves to me in ways that might make me decide, oh, I should be using this chainsaw. So it's a little bit, I think, too pat to put everything onto the human agent here. I think the evidence is undeniable that the easy availability of guns in the United States is part of what has led to the massive outbreaks of gun violence in the United States, because it's an easily accessible affordance in the environment. So I agree with you that I totally agree with you that there's no, and here's the trouble. When people have an out to back up their decision to do X, so they don't have to take responsibility for it, they will often just take that, right? People want that safety. And that's wrong. On the other side of the coin, when you have technologies that give you affordances you wouldn't otherwise have, you will also be, if not compelled, then inclined to utilize those affordances, right, to do things with that technology that technology can do. So it's not as simple as the campus chainsaw massacre.
Of course not, and you're absolutely right about all of those points. But you know, I took a hyperbolic point to highlight the agency of us as humans in all this. And so, in gun control analogy is absolutely apt. I'm happy to live in a country where we do have stricter gun control regulations, and I think that makes for a safer, more civil society. And not that there should be no regulation on AI, but that we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that it's ultimately human decisions that lead us to where we're at. And the danger and expecting regulations to solve all of this for us is getting back to affordances. There's also the issues of incentives. And even if using this type of AI for this purpose is made illegal, if I can make a lot of money doing that and the risk of me getting caught is very low, enough people will do that it will happen. So there's also a false sense of security and, oh, well, we'll just legislate crime away and then there'll be no crime. Problem solved.
Example that I think it happened a few weeks ago, or I think end of October, not a few weeks much. But we have autonomous cars on the road, I think in California and San Francisco. I think the fleet of 60 cars, completely fully autonomous, pick up people, drop off. And it was an accident that, I mean, we try to see it bulletproof it and it's safe, and then it has the license, regulation still. But what happened is that somebody hit, unfortunately, a horrible incident, but somebody hit a person, human driver, throw the person in front of a fully autonomous fleet car. And then what happened is that it is stopped, but then the protocol is pulled over. You had an accident. So it pulled over for 30 feet or something, dragged the person on the car. Nobody thought about this scenario, right? You can't foresee as human all scenarios that may happen. And as I said, it's an autonomous thing that you don't know. You can't fully prove everything. So what happened now, they kind of canceled the license for now, like 600 cars are out to figure out what to do. But it's a learning process. But it's the notion of agents. Did they check out on the responsibility? Probably they did a lot of check, but we never thought about a human, throw it under this and that scenario. And they're going to come in future as well. But it's a constant going and learning.
I have a little tangent. I read a stat that 80% of people think they're above average drivers. So 80% of people think they're above average drivers. So there's a fallacy that people think that they're better at driving than they are. If we get AI or autonomous vehicles to be 95% perfect, which is assuming better than the vast majority of drivers, is there a certain like how do you think of how good does AI have to be before it replaces humans? Does it have to be better than the best human, or does it just have to be better than the average human?
I've been thinking about this problem for a bit. Here's my actual worry, is that we don't actually have a metric for what good driving is. And given how bad humans are in some metrics at driving, it's amazing we don't have more accidents than we do. Right? Somehow we coordinate. And the reason we coordinate is because of all the things I was talking about earlier. We're just really sensitive to one another. Like you're driving down the road and somehow you know that that person is about to turn right, even though their turn signal is not on. You can just see by the way they're moving their car. Right? There's something mysterious but also beautiful about this ability to see one another's intentions. My concern here is not with the precision of automated vehicles, but with the fact that they're going to be different from human beings. And so there's going to be, I think, a disastrous, potentially, transition from a few automated vehicles on the road, no big deal. As that percentage grows, they are not going to be predictable to us in the same way that we're predictable to each other. Right? And so I think I agree that if we had a fully automated fleet that could all talk to each other, right, and coordinate things, that it would be, essentially an accident-free environment, or nearly so. Like, things happen. Trees drop into the road, and you can't do anything about that, right? But as far as average driving goes, it would be a near accident-free environment. The real issue is that transition. When humans are on the road and these vehicles are on the road, and each one doesn't really understand the other, that's going to create potentially, I think, massive problems.
I was in a room just like this about 4 or 5 years ago. It was in Gothenburg, and there was a room full of people who work in computer science. They were some of them were developing automated vehicles. And there was, I had been there because I was talking about data harms, much like I have been already today. And one of somebody came in from a company developing automated vehicles, and they were talking about the fact that they still were not fully able to, the vehicles they were developing were not fully able to identify people on the side of the road, right? And this is 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And my concern is the distance between people who are developing these systems and the kinds of conversations they are having, because they're all problem solving and they're developing and they're working at great speed. The actual what's happening on the ground and the problems that are connected with these systems, that the people making decisions about whether or not they should be implemented, how and when, may not be totally aware of, because of course in between that is a whole world of discourse and marketing and hype, and our conversations, I think, are ignorant in some ways, in many ways, deliberately so, of the actual real world complications of applications. This kind of edge case, there are so many other kinds of edge cases. And so it's not just one edge case. This isn't just one example. Like, this is going to happen again, and it's going to happen again, and it's going to happen again. And the developers know it. And they have real concerns about whether or not these things should be used or are fit for purpose. But then you get politicians in the mix, you get people trying to sell tech, and things get moved far too quickly. So that's my concern.
Back to these edge cases, these 2 points that you mentioned, it's less of a I don't see it as a like driving. This is a good driving versus bad driving. Those edge cases are the difficult ones. So think about insurance now. If you buy a car, you are being insured. So the insurance company, TD Melashmonex, is going to insure you. RBC Insurance is going to insure you, not your car. If it becomes fully autonomous, I don't have a hands on it, so it's a Waymo. I'm sitting here in the back, right? So is the insurance company insures the algorithm? And then the second question is, imagine a scenario which the stuff that we leave to accident and we are comfortable. You go to in an intersection, you God forbid it happens in a moment that a mom and a kid are walking on that side, an elderly is there, a young person is there, for example, like in suits, right? And an algorithm is going to analyze it, right? It's a moment that another car comes towards you as an electric car, and you need to decide, should I hit this one or that one? So for algorithm, you have to think about it. It's a very horrible situation to think about, that should I go with the mom and kid, or should I go with the elderly? Maybe he has lived enough, 70 years old, maybe I'll go with that one. Or with that gentleman in suit, right? It's algorithm. If you are going to go for that accident, you have to think about it, right? But if a human being, you're on the moment, at the moment, you make a lot of good decisions based on the intuition or accidents that I don't know what happened, but the law enforcement or the court understand a human being irrational behavior at the moment of crisis. But what are you planning if such a scenario? It's a very common thing that happens on the intersection.
It's interesting. It's the trolley problem in philosophy, and now it's actually applied. It's very fascinating. We have about 10 minutes left, so our final question, it's definitely a big one to unpack. How do you think AI will restructure our society in the coming 50 to 100 years? And then the second part of that is, what advice do you have to people in the audience, to people in general, to navigate that future?
I'll start. We go back a couple thousand years. Let's go back to the Greeks, the Romans. The best mode of transportation was a horse-drawn vehicle. And then we flash forward to the 18th century, and the best mode of transportation is a slightly better horse-drawn vehicle. And that was 2,000 years. Then 200 years forward from the 18th century, we've got humans walking around on the moon. That is not a better horse-drawn vehicle. There is a lot that has happened. So anyone who thinks they know what's going to happen in technology in the next 20 years is someone you should run away from, because it's like asking Socrates, so what's the first moon landing going to be like? And he'd probably give you an answer, and it would be really interesting and just completely wrong, because there's just no context to have that. Technology so far has accelerated exponentially. And I'm not saying there's going to be a singularity. I'm just saying that it looks like the derivative of growth is going to continue to be positive. And so we should be really cautious and humble about making predictions about the future. At the same time, my advice for those walking into this future is, we have agency in the future. The future is not predetermined. It is not predestined. I think because of AI and other technologies, this is a particularly important moment in human development. And I feel a tremendous amount of responsibility and agency to, engage with civil society to make the right decisions right now. And so I think that sort of utopian vision, we've hinted at a couple of times, where we have AI that assists humanity, empowers us to achieve the goals that we want to achieve, things like solving climate change. That's possible. And it's up to us to choose that path. It is just as easy for us to abdicate responsibility, not be active, or make active choices to use this technology in a way that's pathological. And Joanna has given us many great examples of that. So, seize your agency. You are alive at an important moment in time, an exciting moment in time. Make good decisions.
And everyone in the audience who's here has already taken that first step with the pitches. So I think this weekend is a great opportunity to start making a vote towards building a positive AI future. So thank you all again for being here. Any points from the rest? Any follow-up points from the rest of you on how AI will restructure our society?
I want to echo everything Mark said about prediction. And so the only advice I have is think. Like, really think. Don't just do the thing you can do because you can do the thing. The era of scientists and engineers just doing the thing they can do because they can do the thing and not concerning themselves with the uses of that thing ended with the nuclear bomb. AI technology has equally destructive potential. It also has, very differently from the bomb, incredible creative potential. So my advice, as you continue your careers and develop these technologies, is think, and think hard.
Echoing what the others have said about our inability to predict, but also I think adding to this piece about think, I'm thinking, how would things be different if we thought about from the start technologies as sites of struggle? If we recognize technologies as sites of struggle, and that so many people have different perspectives about how technologies should be used, and struggle, debate, discussion is good. It's a good thing. It's important, right? This is why there was a whole system put in place to encourage, in fact, enable and ensure dissent after, after the bomb, right? And so we need to be doing that now. And whatever you can do to make that happen, to seek out that dissenting opinion, will be really important. And I can promise you it'll be valuable. So that's what I would add for a can do, I suppose, if we think about better technological futures.
Wonderful points mentioned. I think we have agency. Find meaningful in areas that are fun. It doesn't mean that you have to chase whatever is in the news and large corporations. You can go and empower, for example, as I said, parents on how to deal with AI. You can have an AI solution that really look at the number of, for example, elderly now it is with AI robocalls, they're going to get hit and get into scams, paying a lot of money of their pension and so forth, which is heartbreaking. You can develop stuff that may not be similar to necessarily everybody is doing. Chase meaningful areas, and you have agency. Go with teams that are not one sort of view of thing. A diverse thing is significantly important. And I think it's going to be a cool future. I'm not so worried about it, but be responsible innovators.
Awesome. Big round of applause for our panel. Thank you very much.